Hello and welcome back to the Copper Club podcast. A rarity as Callum Goodall finally decides to show up for an episode. Cal, where have you been, mate? How you doing?
I've been busy. Yeah, I'm doing very well, thank you. Busy start of the summer, covering some West Ham bits as well, which I guess is linked to Copper Club with the Louis G stuff. So that's been keeping me on my toes for sure. With lots of travel around the UK as well, for non-footballing reasons. But yeah, I'm good, and I'm very happy to be back. And we have a really exciting raft of stuff to chat about today as well. So looking forward to getting stuck into that.
Yeah, plenty of transfers, and I'm sure the first one is going to definitely excite Peter. But how you doing, mate? We'll address that
Yeah,
first.
I'm good. I'm good. A little bit fatigued because I just came from football, as you know. Tired, but I rushed it and I'm here. So accept my apologies for
Well,
being a
look,
little too sweaty.
I'm sure the adrenaline's going to be pumping for the first player on the list. And we need to get this one out of the way because the last episode in this one, people tuning in are going to start thinking this is a dedicated Chelsea podcast with the amount of links and players we're covering here. So look, we'll do the Chelsea link first, and then I promise we'll move on to other players. But the first player I want to address, Gabriel Mec from Gremio. Peter, talk to me about this lad because I haven't seen too much about him, but the clips, when I was making notes about all the players we were talking about, the first word I've written down here is just outrageous. So can you actually just build on that for us and actually just give our audience a bit more of an education as to who this potential quote unquote wonder kid is?
Yeah, well, I did mention that he's kind of got the crown jewel currently of Gremio's academy. Like I know they pulled Gustavo Nunes out of the bag pretty much when they needed a winger, but with Gabriel Mec, he's basically the next up and coming thing. In a sense, he's kind of looked at as Esteval is for Palmeiras, but I don't think they're on the same level. I think Mec is a little bit less down the line in terms of development compared to Esteval. And you said you haven't watched him. I think it's normal. I've mentioned that actually Rio Grande do Sul games for youth level are rarely actually televised because yes, one game they play versus Internacional, and that's televised across the whole of Brazil. But then the next game they play some random team from the region, and there's no chance in hell anybody can find the stream for that
No,
and highlights.
not even an Amazon stick's going to find those ones, are
Yeah.
they?
So anybody who's telling you they've watched him too much, trust me, they've not. Like
Mhm.
I have my reserved opinion of him, but yeah, definitely the praise for him should be high. I think what he's doing at youth level, and yes, he's just recently been introduced to the under 20s, and he's kind of getting minutes there. He's training with the first team, and he's absolutely crushing it at the under 17 levels. That's definitely a fact. And I mentioned it as well. He's kind of garnishing comparisons to Neymar and Ronaldinho, and I don't think that's just the ability itself. It's the way of play, the style, the flicks, the tricks, the way of dribbling past opponents, basically trying to humiliate them in a sense. That's all in his bag. Like in terms of keeping the ball and actually dribbling with it and keeping it close to him, it's you mentioned it perfectly. Like outrageous, absolutely. And in terms of Chelsea, I'm kind of at this point don't want to speak about Chelsea because they seem to be buying every Brazilian under the sun. But just to defend them a little bit, I do agree that right now Brazil is producing a plethora of really exciting talent, and
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of clubs did this before, and Chelsea didn't do it, where they bought these players and decided to bet on that talent early. And I assume that that's a well-placed strategy. How successful that will become, obviously, I can't really say. But definitely Gabriel Mec, if I have to put it directly, if you have the chance to buy him, you do it and figure it all out later because he is a very, very, very good talent.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's the same story with Paez and Esteval, even though they've had so much more experience. You buy them now and you figure it out in 12, 18 months' time. That can a lot can happen during that period of time. And Cal, what's your thoughts of Gabriel Mec? The one sort of thing I noticed from the short amount of football I've seen of him, I'm definitely not going to pretend to be in the know, but every time he got the ball, even if he was like edging past the player, he wanted to come back to almost beat him again. And at that age, playing in different age categories, and I wasn't aware that he was even training higher than like under 20s, just goes to show how high the club regard him as well. But that was the main thing. Look, I've just put outrageous and wants to beat his man time and time again. But I think I like that purely because you don't get that in the modern game anymore, especially with how Pep's come in and how football's probably become fairly boring in recent years, dare I say it. And it's always quite refreshing to see these South American players coming through and producing their own style, which is why names like Neymar Regen is tagged all over YouTube, because it's actually quite exciting to see.
Yeah, no, I'd 100% agree with that. I think it's the art of humiliation, isn't it, really? Which is painful for any defender, but amazing for any spectator and attacker. I think my main takeaways are the ones that you've already mentioned. I think his ball control is insane. There's a few moments where it bizarrely actually looked like I would question his touch. I'd be like, oh, it's a bit of a ropey touch, but then it was almost like he'd done it on purpose. He'd just then do some strange body feint, and it's like, oh, actually, it's not even a bad touch. He's just sent the defender completely the wrong way by not even being near the ball, and now he's racing towards the final third with the ball under complete control. It's completely bizarre, but worked amazingly. I think the other thing that I think has probably served him well, and I think kind of relates to what you just mentioned about Guardiola and sort of positional play, is that I think one of his biggest strengths is being able to find pockets of space to receive in. And I think this also opens up interesting conversations about his development pathway, wherever he does end up going, is that I think he has thrived. The fact that he's able to find spaces to receive the ball means that he is already set up to be able to beat his man because he's got the run on them already, if that makes sense. So whether that's drifting into the half space and receiving in the pocket and being able to sort of combine with players around him, or whether it's hugging the touchline and actually doing the more traditional wingers role and taking them on the outside, I think he's capable of doing both, which is really interesting. I think as soon as you inevitably rise up the ranks and reach the top echelons of football in Europe, more and more coaches are playing positional football, and I wonder if that freedom to just go and find pockets of space, either out wide in the half space, or to even drop deeper because he's frustrated about the lack of build-up or the lack of effective build-up, so he comes deep to receive the ball and just takes it forward himself. I wonder how much of that is allowed to shine through in a slightly more positional system. Of course, that's not to say that he doesn't have the technical ability to thrive in a positional system, because everything that we've seen suggests that he can. It's just that in a slightly more rigid tactical system where not everything is able to go through him, it might alter how he plays. Whereas at the minute, Gremio, sorry, my throat is not in a good way today. As Peter rightly said, he is the crown jewel, so they're quite happy to allow everything to go through him. And I think you kind of lose that, and the impact then that has could be drastic, or it could be nothing, and he rises to the occasion. I think ultimately what we don't know is how that works, and that's because he is so young and he hasn't really got any senior experience at all. Yeah. So we're all kind of blind on this. We're judging it purely off of what he looks like at youth football, and yes, he looks incredibly technically gifted, but for that reason, as I've just said, and then also for the reasons of his physical development as well, if he doesn't grow, I don't think he will reach the heights that everyone thinks he will, because the one thing is that, yes, what he's doing on the pitch at youth level is outrageous with his ball control and his dribbling and his rainbow flicks and stuff. But as soon as you start trying to do that to a 28-year-old who's 6 inches taller than you, you're getting wiped out. He's got minimal to no upper body strength, really, from what I've seen. He's not tall. He's very quick, and he's very good at creating separation. And obviously, as we know, some of the most elite players have been able to get over the weakness by just being so good. But it's just whether that trajectory continues. Does he get to a point where it doesn't matter that he's not strong because he's so good? Or does that weakness eventually catch up with him and then he starts to get bullied a bit? The reports that I've read are that Gremio are already working on a strength and conditioning stuff individually for him to bulk him up to get him ready for first team football, because I think they're conscious of wanting to get him that experience as soon as possible. But yeah, we shall see.
It's the money, isn't it? That's what it's going to be as soon as they see that, because it's always the question, isn't it? And it's one we have to address all the time. If we appear on different podcasts explaining who these players are, and they're like, well, Esteval, he's quite small, isn't he? So does he need to be big and bulky to be in the Premier League? And looking in the Premier League, players like Brennan Johnson, who haven't done too bad since rising into it. So I get that, but he's 16. Like, things can happen drastically over 2 or 3 years. You raised some good points, and look, if he does go to Chelsea, this question would be redundant to Peter, so I'm going to throw it to you, Cal. Just a random situation. If you had to pick two out of Paez, Mec, or Esteval to sign for West Ham, which one are you leaving out?
Well, I feel like I should give this more thought, but instinctively I just decided Mec because I think based purely on risk to reward ratio, I would back Paez and Esteval to hit way more times than Mec. I think it's almost undoubted that they're going to reach a level, especially with West Ham, that is good enough to be a good signing for us. Whereas I think still with Mec, based on all of the things that we've said that we'd like to see before we're certain that he'll be a good player in Europe, I still think there is some risk there that he comes to West Ham and doesn't hit that, and then you've had a bit of a dud. If we sign Paez and Esteval, oh boy, I certainly wouldn't be complaining.
I just thought I'd put that out there just to see exactly. And look, it just puts a stronger opinion across on Esteval and Paez. And Cal, I think 33 episodes we first spoke about Esteval and how good he was there, and we didn't really have any negative talk about him when we've had the limited. Well, we probably saw him a bit more than Mec, but the limited minutes we had seen of Esteval then, we were very impressed with and getting excited about. Where there's, judging from what you two have said there, like there is something in here, but still 16. Let's see what happens over the next 2 years. Like it could be a real big period for him. But if Gremio are trying to bulk him up, they're obviously looking at those dollar signs and trying to get something sorted, aren't they? Cool.
Yeah, I would.
Go on.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say the only difference that I would have said between Esteval then and Mec then is that I think Esteval wasn't doing quite so many outlandish things. I think sometimes with Mec, with the rainbow flicks and stuff, it feels a bit like, come on, in a real game, are you doing that? Or like, okay, cool, you can do it, but do you need to do that? Whereas I think Esteval, all of the skills and stuff that he did, they all served a purpose, and whereas there's rainbow flicks where he's lost the ball with Mec, and it's kind of like, oh, you've run into your defender, that looked sick, didn't it? But then it's just a bit showmany. Peter's about to tell me off.
So,
Neymar did the same thing. Let's not forget.
Yeah,
Neymar did the same thing.
Neymar did the same thing in the Brazilian round. 2 years coming.
And we also said 5 minutes ago on the podcast that I did anyway. I'm sick of seeing pet ball, and even though England got to the final of the Euros, like it was a tough watch, wasn't it? So do you know what? I'd love someone like Conor Gallagher with an England shirt to do a rainbow kick, but it's not going to happen. Let's move across to our second player we want to talk about. Another player who we've not seen too much of, but probably a hell of a lot more. I've definitely dived into it because I know Peter's very excited about him, but so am I the more I've looked into him. And that's Palmeiras Riquelme, 17 years old. And Palmeiras Academy, what are they feeding these lads? Because they're just producing and producing. And look, we still haven't seen too much of Luis Guilherme, who's made his way across to West Ham, obviously. And look, Riquelme hasn't even played a senior game yet. So how can we be sitting and talking about him saying, well, how are we getting excited about him? But what he's been doing for the under-20s who are absolutely bossing their league, pretty much on maximum points, maximum goals, whatever that means. They just seem to be scoring between 4, 5, 6 every week. And even if they have to scramble through games, they're doing it in the last couple of minutes and just winning. And that has been down to Riquelme, who's I think scored 9 in his last 7 or 8 games, including a hat-trick. It's just been absolutely relentless from him. And the more I've dived into him, I like wherever he can play, because as soon as you get tagged in something on Twitter as to like, who is he, where can he play? And I think the answer is anywhere across that front line. Like he can play left wing, right wing, probably fit attacking mid to an extent, still 17, still mouldable. And probably playing that striker role just purely because of the amount of goals he's produced. And I think the area of his game, which I've been really taken by, I absolutely love his finishing technique. The way he wraps his foot around the ball and can either drive it low or balloon it into the top corner, which I've only ever really seen on FIFA or like PES back in the day when you just used to balloon a ball and it somehow went in. It seems to have that variety in him when you don't know if it's going to go into the bottom corner or the top corner, because it's not like he's generating so much power. He's doing the exact same motion. He's getting into those attacking positions on the left when he's played for like Brazil under 20s. He can produce a long pass. On the right-hand side, he likes to cut inside, or he likes to get down the wing and pick out a striker. So his passing's very good. There's just a lot to be excited about, and it's crazy how Nottingham Forest are being linked to him, and their incredible work in South America continues. Obviously, I'm delighted with that. A weakness to his game from what I've seen, the way to describe it, I I think he's allergic to his left foot. I don't think I've ever seen him use his left foot, which, again, you can get away with it if you're very skillful and quick, as you've already pointed out, Cal. But that does sometimes bring limitations. But Pete, I know that this is a player who you were like, oh boy, all over Twitter. You were getting excited about him. So obviously I was very excited. And obviously the more games I've watched, I've definitely got excited. Talk me through this lad. I mean, I don't think he's quite on the same wavelength as Esteval Paez Mec to an extent, or where they think his ceiling is, of course, because he wouldn't be on his way to Nottingham Forest. But for the rumoured price between 5 to 10 million, looks an incredible pickup.
I think
it's going to be negative now, isn't it?
No. I'm going to say you've done him a disservice there, because I think it's actually phenomenal scouting work from Nottingham Forest, if anything.
Yeah, for sure.
So on Riquelme Felipe, to be honest, I kind of known him for about a year now, but he's kind of, again, another player who's been in the shadow of Hendrik, Esteval, Luis Guilherme to an extent.
Yeah,
he's just now getting his flowers because he was now bumped up to under 20 level. And he's taken it by storm. I think he's got, 11 goals in total, I believe. And you mentioned the streak that he's been on recently. And you have mentioned the weakness to his game. If I have to compare him to Gabriel Mec, for example, he's much more physically developed to him compared to someone like Gabriel. Because yes, obviously he's 1 year older than him, and that's a fact. But he's still also at youth level where Gabriel is. And if you compare the two and the way that one can actually get easily bullied off the ball, as Cal mentioned, by someone much more senior, I don't think that can happen with Riquelme. If anything, Riquelme right now actually reminds me a little bit, if I have to put it in a sense, of John Kennedy. Just a little bit. Not exactly, because I don't think he has the same level of shot power when it comes to like proper shooting technique. Like John Kennedy just hits every ball with venom if he manages to bag it correctly. But like Riquelme, as you said, is a little bit more technical, a little bit more diverse in his finishing. But it's that type of prospect that he can play anywhere across the front three. His styles are similar. The way he wants to be on the ball consistently. All of these things kind of do him service, and it's why he's kind of become the main man at Palmeiras. It's Palmeiras' academy. And I'm just surprised that at this point I feel like I'm saying that every Brazilian just has a big, phenomenal package of abilities that you just can't not speak about, because it feels like you're saying this for every single talent. Like, I'm lost for words just how many really talented players can grace Europe. And obviously, it might not make it to like the top tier level. No disrespect to Forest, I'm sorry. But he could still go on the Murillo route in a sense, join Forest and absolutely take the league by storm. And then the big clubs are all flocking around to just get him, because how did they miss this talent in a sense? So I'm absolutely...
Yeah,
great work by Forest. Honestly, great work by Forest.
Yeah, no, 100%. And look, it does make sense, the link, because they were trying to sign Giovanni the season before. They were very interested in him before he decided to move to, whisper it quietly, Al Sadd. Still hasn't played a game for them because he did his ACL in training. So that move didn't work out too well for him. But I'm quite excited to see how he gets on. But obviously Forest are looking in the right places. But the more I've seen of him, and yes, I think he's a lot more ruthless in front of goal. But if you look at how Esteval, even Hendrik to an extent, but Luis Guilherme, the way they're so direct on the ball, the way they run forward, and you can say that they could all comfortably play across the park. The Palmeiras Academy, the coaches, they're all training them to do something. Yes, they're all eating something special, but they're all being trained and programmed to be direct and attack. And that's why they're so lethal in the final third. And that's why at this level, he's showing that he is ready to take that senior step up. But obviously, we know what Abel Ferreira is like. He likes to slowly nurture them in. So, and when the attention is on these players, he seems to play them less and less. So I'm not sure when that first senior game is going to come, probably in a cup game. Cal, are you excited about this lad?
Yeah, for all the reasons you've said. And I think you gave credit at the start to Forest's scouting setup. And I think that is true in the sense that they've clearly uncovered a very undervalued talent, I would say, early on in his development. But I think we can all agree that all the signs suggest that the marriage of the technical with the physical suggests that he should at the very least be able to come and play in Europe. But I think also in terms of, and this is something that I think we don't see enough of in scouting, it's not just scouting for the talent with a view to being able to sell them at some point. but bringing in a talent where there is a clear pathway, as far as I can see, at Forest in terms of not only his position, but also the style of football. If you think of Anthony Elanga, you think of Hudson-Odoi, you think of Awoniyi, you think of those styles of players that are those direct in-transition players. You're going to sit deep and then you're going to rely on one of them to get the ball, carry it forward, and hopefully be lethal in front of the goal if they get there. I think Riquelme is exactly that, right? And I think you're not bringing him in to start straight away. Of course you're not. But you're bringing him in with a view to giving him minutes here and there. And if someone like Hudson-Odoi or Elanga has another decent season for Forest and moves on, then you've got Riquelme ready to go up, and he's already developed underneath those talents and he understands the style of play. So I think on both accounts, it's really, really impressive scouting. And I think the same can be said for Murillo when he was brought over. Stylistically, perfect fit with how he was playing in Brazil at the time. And I think that's how you scout to get the biggest return, if that's what you're doing as that club, because you go, okay, here's a player over here that everyone knows is really good. He's going to cost us a little bit more because he is really, really good and everyone knows it. But we don't know if he's necessarily going to fit, but we just want him because he might not look great at Forest, but City might turn around and go, well, in a better team, he'd look great. How you get the cheap ones is go, well, people might not notice him because he's not playing that well, but we think we can make a real space for him in our team. We'll give him that platform and then we can turn 5-10 million into 40-50 million and your profit's way up. So I think clubs like Forest, like West Ham, like Brighton, obviously previously, these clubs that can't go out and have the world's riches and pay for those premium players, go out and find them and make sure you've got a pathway. Don't let them just rot in the reserves and then have to send them on loan and then you kind of break even at the end of it. So yeah, really, really smart, and also good, I guess, for you, Nath, from a Forest point of view, to see you heading in that direction, given everything when Marinakis came in and all that was said about bringing in 26 players with no real coherent strategy. It seems over the last few windows that Forest have really pivoted in the right direction. And that can only be a good thing, not just for Forest, but also for the Premier League, I think, because as fans of football, we all want to see these mercurial talents in the league and in Europe. So the more they come over, the happier I'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Forest fans are feeling quite smug because when I sat down and spoke with Daniel Taylor from The Athletic, he said the long term, it was all about staying up in that first season. So yes, we had to sign it. Well, Forest had to sign a lot of players rather. And the idea was that they were always going to follow the Brighton model, because that's the only way where you're going to crack that top 10, top 12 is to, yes, you may lose a few players like Murillo and Danilo or Riquelme if he comes, but the amount of money you make off it, and you're building that nice South American contingency at one club rather than bringing one or two in here. They're all coming into the first team now, and we didn't expect Murillo to come in straight away and play as many minutes as he did, but we knew what he was capable of. Danilo was obviously very experienced for his age, and having those players in and around the club, it's what attracted Carlos Miguel there as well. So I don't think Forest are doing anything special. I don't think Brighton were doing anything special, but they were just willing to take a chance on players who they could see fitting into the Premier League, and fair play to them, and long may it continue. As you said, the more which come across to the Premier League and show what they can do, it's what it's all about. And like, yes, you can say they're leaving the leagues too early, but these young lads deserve the opportunity and to reap the rewards as everyone else does in Europe. So I'm really excited about, obviously, but between 5 to 10 million or 5 million with add-ons, it's nothing in this market. We'll go from one small price to potentially an extreme in another Palmeiras player. And do you know what? I'm actually really excited because I haven't spoken to you boys off the podcast about Richard Rios and which way you're leaning towards here, because there's two things about a Copa America, isn't there, or a major tournament where someone who is a half starter for Palmeiras has a wonderful tournament for Copa America. Don't get me wrong, we've spoke about Richard Rios on the podcast before. He's a good player for Palmeiras, but he completely stepped it up under Néstor Lorenzo, had a wonderful tournament. But as a result, there's now links with, I saw Man United, which I just think is crazy. Man United, Everton, Fulham, they're all coming out the woodworks. They're like, all the clips from Copa America look like he's the next best talent, and everyone's missed him because he's 24. That would not have happened. So I'm not doing a disservice for Richard Rios. I do really like him, but the links to Man United to me just seems outrageous, and the comments being made about him. And you guys know that I'm normally not a data guy, but I can't just say outlandish things if I'm not going to bring data to the table. So what I did before I jumped on the podcast, I did a little bit of homework, Okay. And I looked into a few defensive midfielders from the tournament because I'm wondering about. I like Richard Rios. I think he's a wonderful player, but it's all about the right club and the right move for him in terms of like what role he would have. Because some people are saying, well, he's a number 6 or number 8. But when I dived a little bit deeper, so bear with me here. I looked into balls recovered, ground duels, and successful dribbling rates throughout the tournament. I looked at João Gomes, who played every game in the heart midfield for Brazil, Ugarte for Uruguay, and then Rodrigo de Paul, obviously for Argentina. Okay. And Richard Rios had I'm not going to go through all the statistics here, but you can just do some digging afterwards if you don't believe me. But balls recovered, Richard Rios' for the tournament was 3.7, where everyone else averaged at least 5.6. Ground duels, he won the least amount, but his successful dribbling rate was through the roof. It was 72%, where everyone else was, well, Gomez 43%, Ugarte 38%, De Paul 29%. So obviously they're all fixed number 6s. And Richard Rios was allowed this license to go forward for Colombia because Lorenzo wanted his team to attack in waves, and it really benefited him. Okay, we saw him in the number 8 role, scored a scream against Panama, got in the box against USA in a pre-tournament friendly. Do you know what? His stats in the final were unbelievable. Okay, 100% on the dribbles, 3 out of 3 long passes, 6 out of 9 ground duels, 34 out of 36 passes. He lost possession 9 times, but to compare, Lerma 11, James Rodriguez 17. So even that was a good statistic in his favour. But what I worry about him, if he's going to take that huge jump from being a squad player at Palmeiras and move across, and people in the Premier League expect him to be a number 6, I think he's going to get found out. I think he needs to go to a team where he's going to be an out-and-out number 8 if he moves across to Europe. And I don't think Premier League is right for him potentially at this stage. And people are going to be turning around and going, well, he was amazing in Copa. He's 24. Like, everything nowadays is if there's a link in South America, they have to go to a top team in the Premier League. But I don't see it. I see like a more number 8 in Portugal or something like that. Just from his ability there to have space to bring the ball forward. Would he necessarily get that space, or would he have the time in a team like Everton? I don't really see it if they're going to be battling for relegation. So I'm really mixed about this. I think the Man United rumours are ridiculous. I don't see it working out. But Cal, look, I've done enough ranting. I'm going to put my notes to one side, and I'm intrigued to hear if you agree with anything I've said. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with your concerns, definitely. I think what you've raised about the notion of him being a lone 6 is where I stand on this as well. I think defensively he's probably too aggressive to be a lone 6. I think he's not tactically disciplined enough. I think he's so eager to spring out that without having that cover alongside him, I think you get absolutely bypassed 9 times out of 10 in the Premier League. So I think probably the sort of destroyer mould in a double pivot where he's allowed to spring forward, but it doesn't even need to be an amazing defender next to them, because I do think Rios is good defensively. I think he's tenacious. I think he's a lot of things you want in a 6. It's not like you need to have a elite ball winner next to him. You just need an extra body to slow down if they do get past, so that your defense can reset, etc., etc. So I think, in a double pivot, I'd like it. Or as you say, maybe you play him as one of the 8s ahead of a 6 and just absolve him of any real defensive responsibility and just make him sort of one of your key pressing triggers and just get him to go and chase things down. I think the carrying is really interesting. I think we've seen it work in the Premier League. I think N'Golo Kante used to do it a lot for Chelsea. I think Declan Rice does it really well, both when he was at West Ham and for Arsenal. I think those spaces do exist, but the rest of the team need to be able to make it, open it up for you, ahead of you. Whether that happens depends entirely on where he lands. If the rumours to United are true, I personally don't see that. Not least because I just don't think he's ready for that level yet. If he's coming in as a squad player, fair enough, maybe it works as a value option. But I think clearly the future of that Man United midfield is going to be built around Kobbie Mainoo. And I think stylistically, Kobbie Mainoo is a ball carrier who wants to get on the ball in deep areas and bring it forward. Mm-hmm. You can't have 2 ball carriers in double pivot. It's just not going to work. Where's your progression coming from? And that brings me to my final point about my concerns about Richard Rios being an elite deep lying midfielder at the top level. is that he just doesn't really offer anything in way of progressive passing. He's not that guy. Again, you can fix this by building the team around him with the right profile of player. Declan Rice, again, I'll talk about him because I know a lot about him as a West Ham fan, but progressive passing from deep has never been his strength. That's not his strong suit. He's a brilliant ball winner. He reads the game amazingly well. He can carry the ball really well, but his deep passing has never been amazing. So it's always been important that you put a player next to him who can take that. And that has been the case. I think there's not that many. I'm not saying he's the same player, but I think out of possession, there's a few similarities with Rice as well. I think Rios eats up ground really well in transition defence. I think his biggest strength is in those transitional phases of turning defence into attack by winning the ball and carrying forward. And when he's retreating from attack into defence and eating up ground in defence and using his long legs to sort of swoop in, which is exactly what Rice does, right? But Rice's all-round game is just infinitely better and proven at a much higher level. So I think with Rios, I think there is a player there. It's just a very sort of niche profile that you need to find the right sized hole. Otherwise, it's going to be a case of square peg round hole, which I don't think will work at a lot of clubs. The United one, as I said, confuses me. Also, when you look at it alongside the links to Agate, I'm like, what sort of midfield are you trying to build? Because I don't know what balance you're creating here. Weird shout, which I think could be interesting, and I'll give my rationale, is that, as we said, I think he has a tendency to get bypassed quite a lot in midfield. One way is to play an elite defensive midfielder next to him, but the elite defensive midfielders probably play at teams where I don't think he's ready for. So another way would be to have three centre-backs, which means if he does get bypassed, there's an extra layer of support there. Adam Wharton is an elite deep-line playmaker in his distribution from the midfield. Ollie Glasner's just come in, is about to embark on his first big season. Doucouré's injury prone. Could you bring in Richard Rios as a potential replacement for what Jefferson Lerma used to do at Crystal Palace? Bring him in. Doesn't necessarily need to start, but is probably capable enough to be second string. But if he does come in and play well alongside Wharton, you could have a really nice, aggressive number 6 destroyer alongside Wharton, who's a more composed, reliable progressor in a 3-4-3. I think could be quite nice, and I think that's probably about the level. Palace seems to work. They're kind of an exciting club. They have a really good track record of getting the best out of sort of prospects. So I can see that.
I'd not thought about Palace. I think it's a great shout. It sounds like we are being negative, especially me, about Rios. I do like him, but there's a couple of things I want to address before I come to you, Peter, in terms of when have you ever seen like a squad player at a top Brazilian team then make that jump, and then all of a sudden he's not worthy of starting for Palmeiras, but he's worthy of starting for someone like Man United or Fulham. That doesn't make any sense to me. And for people who didn't watch Colombia and are getting excited during Copa America and then are getting excited about Rios, the amount of room he had, like they played Paraguay, Costa Rica and Panama out of 3 of their 6 games. Okay, not doing discredit to Colombia, I thought they were wonderful to watch, but the amount of teams who tried to double up on Luis Diaz whilst having one eye on James in the middle opened up so much space for Lerma and Rios to bring the ball forward and exploit it, which is why his that's what I wanted to bring up. His successful dribbles rate was 72%, but back in Brazil Serie A, it's 42%. Okay, maybe that's down to Abel Ferreira restricting him a bit, but Colombia got so much room because so many people were focusing on Diaz and James roaming in that less space, and it allowed Rios and Munoz down that right-hand side so much more room. So yeah, well, I said that I'm going to stop being negative, and it sounds like I'm being even more negative, but I just don't see how a squad player is all of a sudden the answer to Europe's top teams. But he is a very good player. He's good in tight spaces, but it's just a step too far for me at this stage. Any comments, Peter? Any positivity from yourself?
Not really, no. I think you both covered it very well. The thing I was going to point to is that I think even from his Guarani days, which I mentioned to you, that I've kind of seen him at Serie B level as well, he's kind of always been the same player. And there's always been a debate about where he actually should play. Because at Guarani, he was kind of being pushed into the defensive midfield role, and then he got moved slightly forward. So I'm not really surprised that there's still the debate about where he should actually fit. And you mentioned about the fact that the jump is too big. I completely agree. And I'm going to throw a player comp here just because it reminds me of him. I don't know why. But I remember a couple of years ago, I think Charles Aranguiz was linked to a plethora of big clubs and then ended up signing for mid-table at that point, Leverkusen, because obviously just to jump to bigger clubs was not his forte in that sense. Like he was not good, ready for that. So I can't see him. I can't see him at a big club right now. I think he's a good prospect, kind of a little bit of a late bloomer because Flamengo sold him and all that at youth level. And it's fine to be a late bloomer. Nobody's saying you should like make your move at 20. Like time has a place for everybody, but I just can't see. I don't think he's developed as much to be playing in a top three, say, championship right now, and maybe if not a top three championship, they say like a top 8 club in said top 5 championships. It's just my opinion.
I think to be 24 and still not know exactly where you fit at club level is also a little bit of a red flag. But look, that's enough Rios bashing, which I'm glad that you're on the same page as me because I thought you were going to be like, what the hell is Nathan talking about? This is why I brought data to the table, and you guys know I don't normally do that. So I came prepared. Look, the last 2 players we're going to touch upon today is, of course, Andre and his link to Fluminense. We're not going to go into too much detail because we've done so many dedicated podcasts around him. So if you want to know more about Andre, search for those episodes across Spotify, Apple and YouTube. I basically want to continue the venting really to be like, why on earth aren't Fulham spending that extra 5 million or whatever it is they've been doing, basically arguing over peanuts, aren't they? It's 20 or 25 million for, I still stand by it could be Brazil's best number 6. And yes, Brazil have fallen off a cliff in recent years and they're not their normal selves. But when his competition is going to be João Gomez, I don't understand. I think he's just such a perfect fit with Fulham, especially with the space opening up with people who are leaving. I'm said that we're not going to talk about him, and I feel like this is Andre therapy we're having because us 3 have just been like blowing his trumpet for so long. Does either of you have a message for Fulham before we talk about Jhon Arias?
Not a message as such. I might actually surprise you. I might surprise you. I
Okay.
obviously have been the biggest Andre stan for the longest of times, and I do agree with you. I think I just don't see how or why Fulham are not biting their hands off at this price, because I think inevitably whoever does is going to turn a profit on him, because I think he's ready-made to play for a team way better than Fulham. No offense to Fulham fans. My one thing that I can potentially see is that they might be looking at it thinking, okay, João Palhinha's just left. He's been absolutely essential to everything that we do at Fulham for the last 2 years. He's the fulcrum of this midfield. Is Andre stylistically similar enough for us to not completely change the way that we play? Or if we buy Andre, do we then still need to bring in someone who's slightly more of a destroyer mould, who's just doing the defensive dirty work? And therefore, and therefore, are they looking at it thinking, is this the best use of what I'm assuming is going to be a fairly limited transfer budget to replace their most important player? That's the only thing I can think, is that we all love Andre, we absolutely do, but he's come from playing in a side where he's had so much license to do what he wants, and he gets so much opportunity because they have so regularly had 70% possession, and they drop, and he drops between the centre backs, and he picks up the ball, and he's so comfortable. How much opportunity is he going to have to do that in a Fulham side who are slightly more transitional? They're not exactly a counter-attack side, but they're not a possession-based side either. They're kind of the middle ground, I would say. So I do just wonder if they're like, if this is our big signing this summer, we absolutely have to get it right. And are we setting up Andre not to fail, but are we creating the best environment for him to thrive by asking him to come in and do what João Palhinha did? Because to me, they're completely different players.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't agree with you, because Fluminense, obviously under Denise, and you've just talked about Andre's role there, but obviously they've been horrendous this season.
Yeah,
lost 7 in a row before Andre first came back. He's played 3 of the 4 games since in a completely different style of play, and they've drawn 2 and won one of those games. And his role has changed a little bit compared to where he was with Denise, and he's been able to adapt to that. And I think if you're willing to put 20 million on the table and it's 25 million, then you're already halfway there, and you shouldn't at this point be worried about it, or you wouldn't be putting 20 million pound on the table if you didn't think it was right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I can see where you're coming from for sure, but for me, I don't see it. Let's skip past that because we're going to talk about him all day. People can just go and catch up on the January episode. And let's talk about Jhon Arias, which he's a bit of an enigma, isn't he? I can't figure out exactly where he fits in if he leaves Brazil. I think we spoke about him before on the podcast, and I think we looked at Portugal as a good destination. And Cal, you'll know more than most, when West Ham did their little scouting tour, everyone got linked. And Jhon Arias was one of those players. And don't get me wrong, I like him, and I think he had a solid Copa America. Similar to Richard Rios, I think his ceiling's a little bit limited. I don't know if he's missed the boat. Maybe he's not been picked up before purely because teams realise there's a few weaknesses to his game. He can go missing. He has been a key part of this Fluminense side, which have been failing, and it should be players like that who are dragging the team up the pitch and offering opportunities to Cano, Kennedy, and players like that. And he hasn't really done it. He's gone hiding, and he sort of like whimpered to Copa America, and he was buzzing to get away from it. Had a good tournament, almost to be like, this is my opportunity to get out of Fluminense. But I see it more as a transfer within Brazil rather than a move to the Premier League, because I see it very similar to like Rafael Veiga, who should probably have made the move but has played it safe, maybe looked at Gustavo Scarpa, although his situation was quite niche. Peter, I'm going to come to you for this one. Jhon Arias, thoughts?
No. No.
And we'll see you next week, folks.
Why I'm saying no is, in all seriousness, I just don't think there's room for him. And this is not up to bash De Arrascaeta, who I think is probably, or at least has been, the best player in the Brazilian Real for quite a few years now. Obviously, Rafa Veiga could challenge that as well, but as I said, it's just, I don't think you leave the environment that you've already built and yourself into. And as you mentioned, there are weaknesses to his game. I just don't see why at this stage in his career, although it's not obviously on the decline or anything, I just don't see why he would make the jump to a completely different environment wherever in Europe. Maybe, as you mentioned, maybe Portugal or something like that will probably fit him a little bit more, but I just feel Fluminense or anything in Brazil, it was very smart for you to mention. Maybe if he is to move to the MLS and completely ruin himself in my eyes, but that's worst case scenario.
Peter's clearly not a fan of the MLS. Okay.
No, I'm a big hater towards the MLS because I don't remember even what his name is. Bremer, I think it was. Bremer? He played striker for Sao Paulo. He was 19 years of age. Everybody was singing his praises. I forgot his name. And then he moved, I think it was to Cincinnati FC.
Yeah.
And I just decided since then I've been hating on the MLS every single time.
Sometimes it works out, Peter. Sometimes it doesn't.
No,
MLS.
absolutely can. It's just that I don't feel that at this point Jhon Arias has to move anywhere drastically in order to say I've had an unsuccessful career. Maybe he can test it out, yes, absolutely, but I just don't see a reason for him to. I want to see if, say, for example, now the chance opens up and he can join Palmeiras, for example, or maybe Flamengo, or I don't know, Mineiro, for example, Atlético Mineiro. Why not? Like maybe that internal jump would be smart if he fits the team.
Yeah. I think it's becoming so much more competitive, the Brazil League now. Like now you're throwing Botafogo in it rather than just Flamengo or maybe Palmeiras, and that's it. So I think players are seeing opportunities there. And without spreading rumours, because I'm not 100% sure, but when I was watching Fluminense, he scored and put the ball under his chest, and it was just like, I've just had a baby, or his partner's just had a baby in the last few months. So that has to play a vital part in it. And that was similar with Andre, I think, as well. I know he wanted to stay with Fluminense, but I think he was in a similar situation. But look, let's wrap the podcast up with the West Ham link, Cal. You're in charge. You've got 5-10 million to spare at the end of the window. You're not going to bring in someone like Will Griggs for 5 million. You're going to bring in Jhon Arias. What are your thoughts on that? Would you take him at West Ham?
I'm probably the right person, but also the wrong person to ask because of how deeper connection I had with Fluminense last season. So probably just to see him play for West Ham, I'd probably do it. But
True.
But no, from a squad point of view, do you know what? I think there's not really a space in the starting 11 at the minute for a player to start in either of those wide positions, because from what I assume, Jared Bowen's going to play on the right. Kudus will probably play on the left, and we'll bring in a new striker, hopefully. And then you're left with needing probably backup on the left. You've got Lewis Gilham as the backup on the right, who could also play on the left and maybe a bit in the 10 and the 8, depending on how we want to develop him. And then you've got Antonio and maybe Danny Ings as the striker backup. So you're basically looking for a left winger who can come in and be a rotation piece, but has the potential to play across multiple positions. If it's between 5 and 10 million for a 26-year-old who's proven to be an incredibly good creator, I honestly think if Jhon Arias had added goals to his game consistently over the last few years, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because he'd be playing for someone like Milan or something.
Yeah.
Everything else he's got carrying, he's got creativity, he's consistently in like the 90th percentile for dribbles, take-ons, progressive carries, assists, expected shot creating actions, all of that stuff. But it's just that lack of goals. He's just not prolific. He never has been. And I think the more the game goes on and the more inside forwards have become a thing, and it just has kind of meant that Arias has missed the boat. So I think if he had goals, he'd be here already. If it was 10 years ago, he'd probably also be here, because you didn't need your wingers to score goals, because they were meant to provide for your number 9. So I think, unfortunately for him, he's probably caught between a rock and a hard place. But if I was going to bring in, like I say, someone as depth in wide areas that could also probably do a shift up top if he needed to, I think it's a fairly low cost, low risk addition when you want to be spending the money elsewhere.
Yeah. And you said about his goals. Have you seen his run up of penalties? It's that one where if he's there for your team, you would absolutely hate it. And when he misses it, it's horrendous. But let's wrap up this transfer talk. I just want one word from both of you. And it doesn't have to be the best. Just one who you would like out of the 5 players we've spoken about. Riquelme, Mec, Rios, Jhon Arias. Who are you taking to your club? Who would you like? Who would you want out of those? Cal, coming to you first.
Andre. That was the obvious one. Come on.
Pia?
Every single Brazilian under the sun, as I said, I can't not go Gabriel Mec, just because we don't technically need, but we need a left winger. So let's say Gabriel Mec. That would be my choice. I'd say.
I did say one word. I did say one word. For sure.
I never do one words, Nathan. You know me.
That is one word for you. Do you know what? I'm going to say Andre as well, just because it needs to happen, and the whole Fulham deal is really annoying me now. But look, chaps, thank you very much for your time. We'll be back again with more transfer talk over the summer. Do subscribe across Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Until then,